old at the time. Eta is here this evening to tell us her story of survival as a child during the Shoah. Her presentation this evening is at best a most difficult task for any Holocaust survivor. By retelling of the sorrow and loss she suffered, she relives the horror of the Holocaust experience. Mrs. Hecht is here this evening to tell you of her firsthand experiences of the Shoah, so that you not only learn of it, but you will be able and actually obligated, in my view, to pass it on to succeeding generations. We are indeed fortunate in this community to have had so many Holocaust survivors reside here and educate us with their description of what they saw and endured in the Holocaust. Many communities are not blessed with this opportunity to hear these first-hand histories, which have become ever more important to be memorialized, not only because of their historical importance, but to refute Holocaust deniers. Please listen attentively and be aware that this presentation is painful for Mrs. Hecht. However, she sees her duty as a witness to tell the story. Then it becomes the responsibility of everyone here tonight, not only to remember, but most importantly to retell the story. Reading about history is simply not the same as hearing about it firsthand, and tonight we have that opportunity and to learn about it from a survivor. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to Eta Hecht. Please welcome Eta Hecht.
I am very honored, and I thank you for inviting me to speak to you this evening, this very special evening, the commemoration of Yom HaShoah. As you know, Hitler and the Nazis exterminated 6 million Jews. 2 out of 3 Jews in Europe died. 1.5 million were children. I was a child during the Holocaust, but I'm a lucky one. I survived. I was born in Lithuania, in the city of Kovna, Kaunas in Lithuania, in 1938. Jews had lived in Lithuania since the 13th century. They had been expelled and had returned through the ages. By 1940, the Jewish population of Lithuania was about 220,000 people, and in Kovna there were 40,000. By the end of the war, 95% of the Lithuanian Jews were killed, higher than anywhere else in Europe. As I mentioned, I was born in Kovna. I was an only child. My parents were both teachers of a Jewish school, and my father was a principal of the school. Until the age of 2.5, I had a normal and happy childhood. But then in June of 1941, the Germans entered Lithuania, and the lives of the Jews changed drastically. And the nightmare begins. Jews were expelled from universities. They lose their jobs, properties are confiscated, possessions are stolen. Jews have to wear a yellow star on their outer garment on the front and in the back. Jews are not allowed to walk on sidewalks. They had to walk in the gutter. The Jewish people are the target of hatred and murder. And this was done not just by the Germans, but also by many Lithuanian collaborators. In fact, one of the main reasons so many Jews were killed during the war was because of the help of the local population. In July 1941, the Germans announced that the Jews of Kovna were to move into a ghetto, which was located in a suburb of Kovna called Slabotka. And by the end of August, the ghetto was sealed off. It was encircled by barbed wire and closely guarded. Anyone trying to escape was shot. The houses were primitive. There was no running water. Everyone was very crowded. My parents and I and my grandmother were in a tiny little room. Food was rationed. We had a piece of bread and watery soup with potato peels. And men and women were forced to do slave labor, working 80 to 100 hours a week. In fact, the Kovna ghetto became a concentration camp in 1943. Life in the ghetto was a continuous fight for survival, from hunger, disease, and the threat of death. Now you're probably wondering, why didn't the Jews fight back? Well, very simply, they had no food, no guns, and they had no help from the outside things would get better. After all, Germany, the most civilized nation in the world, a nation that gave us Goethe and Bach, who would think that it would give us Auschwitz? And also to keep resistance at a minimum, the Germans always lied and used elaborate deception. For example, after the ghetto was first established, the Germans said they wanted volunteers. They needed 500 people to work on the municipal archives. They wanted the teachers and the intellectuals in the community. So people volunteered, and they were taken away and never returned. They were all killed. This is the way they lied. Nonetheless, there was an underground movement in the ghetto, and there were attempts to help save lives, to sneak young people out so that they could join the partisans and fight the Nazis. There were individual acts of heroism. My mother, for example, risks her life. She would smuggle in an egg or a piece of bread. She would hide it in the lining of her coat. As the women returned from work from outside the ghetto, they were searched, and if they found anything, that person would be shot. There were individual acts of sabotage as well. People working in the factories would make faulty parts, defective parts, so that they would undermine the Germans' efforts into the war. Although the Jews were unable to carry out a unified, large-scale resistance, they chose spiritual resistance. The slogan was, "Bleiben am Mensch," remain human. Schools were forbidden in the ghetto, but the underground provided schooling for children nonetheless, ages 9 to 12. Children, all of them 12, had to go to work. People wrote poetry, they kept diaries. In fact, a man by the name of Abraham Torrey had a very explicit diary that he was able to hide in crates in the ground, and so that the world would know what had happened. However, how do you fight when you're suppressed, when you're hungry, and full of disease and a lack of arms, and you fear for the safety of your family? Mere survival was an act of heroism. 3 months after we arrived in the ghetto, one morning, October 28, 1941, 6 o'clock in the morning, trucks came rolling down the streets with loudspeakers, announcing that everyone was to leave their home and assemble on a large square called Deportations Square. Very ironic, Democrat Square. And they said it was for a roll call. And anyone found hiding in the house would be shot. Now we were instructed to line up 8 people in a row, and we were forced to stand all day in the cold with no food or drink, while a Nazi by the name of Helmut Rauka sat on a chair and pointed people to the left or to the right as people marched by him. Our row consisted of my parents, my grandmother, myself, and several other people. As we approached the Nazi, he pointed us to the left. But my father had noticed that the old, disabled, and children were sent to the left. So father quickly pulled us over to the right. He later told us that his heart told him, "Don't go to the left." But we found out that the people who were sent to the left were sent to their death. 10,000 people, 4,000 of them were children, were killed that day. That day became known as the Große Aktion, the Great Action, or Selection. We, Lithuanian Jews all over the world, have an annual memorial service on October 28th. We say Kaddish for the Jews who perished on that day. After that day, my parents realized that they had to keep me inside, and that most of the time I was afraid to just sit in the room. I would sit under a table that was covered with a big cloth because I just felt more secure, because Nazis would just walk into the house. And they were always searching for children. One day we found out that they were coming. My parents rolled me up in the bedding and placed me on the bed against the wall like the back of a sofa, and they told me not to move. I felt that I was going to suffocate, but I knew that I was not to move. I was aware of the danger, as young as I was. Years later, my parents, my mother, would discuss things that happened in the ghetto, and she'd say, oh, you probably don't remember, you were too young. But of course I did remember. I'd like to tell you about another occurrence that I remember vividly. I was then 5.5 years old. This is referred to as the Kinderaktion, the children action, March 27 and 28, 1944. For 2 days, the Nazis undertook a massive organized search for children. A cousin came running to our house warning us about this, so we quickly hid under the stairs that led to the 2nd floor. My cousin leaned an old mattress against the opening so that to camouflage where we were. It was cold, we had no food, and I had a cough, and I tried very hard to suppress so that the Nazis wouldn't hear me. We could hear the sound of the Nazi boots climbing the stairs above our heads. Also, we could hear screaming outside of mothers and children. We could see their shadows through the cracks between the wooden boards of our barrack. The Germans were snatching children away from their parents and threw them on trucks and took them to their destination. That was evident. When the Kinderaktion was over, my parents realized that something needed to be done to save my life. Clock was going to run out. They had to get me out of the ghetto. But how? They had heard that the Jewish underground had contacted a priest who would contact Christian families who would take in children, Jewish children. But he said he couldn't do anything until Christmas. Now this was March. My parents felt they couldn't wait this long. My parents were getting frantic. Finally, contact was made with a Christian colleague of my father, who was a principal of a Christian school, whom my father knew from before the war. My father asked him if he would take me, if he would save my life, and Mr. Lazauskas agreed. So now my parents proceeded to instruct me about my escape. They told me that I was not to admit that I was Jewish, that I was Christian. They gave me a new name. My name was Elenice. I was instructed to say if I were asked about my parents, that I was orphaned. My parents then practiced with me to sit motionless in a potato sack, which my mother would carry out of the ghetto on the day of my escape. The long-awaited day of my escape arrived in April 44, 3 weeks after the Chillenaktion. I was placed in the potato sack, and my mother joined the other women lining up to march out of the ghetto to their place of work, carrying the bag with me in it like a bag of tools, again risking her life for me. Outside the ghetto, mother quickly slipped away, and she removed her star, and she ran with me and took me to, we were meeting a woman who in turn would take me to my Christian family. I had spent 3 years in the ghetto, almost 3 years. I was a child at that time, but I never had a childhood. I did not have toys as children do. I did not play outdoors. I did not have companions my age to play with. The only companions I had were hunger and fear. And when my mother carried me out of the ghetto, I did not know whether I would ever see her or my father again. While I stayed with the Lazauskas family, there was an incident that I'd like to share with you too that I remembered. One night, planes were flying overhead, and the Lazauskas family thought that we were going to be bombed. So they all went to hide in a bomb shelter that left me alone in the house. Apparently they were worried that neighbors might get suspicious. 4 months after I was smuggled out of the ghetto, July 1944, the Kovno ghetto was liquidated. The remaining Jews were transported to concentration camps in Germany, and the ghetto was burnt down, so anyone who was hiding in the ghetto remained behind. Was burnt, was died. They traveled for days, overcrowded, without food. Many died en route. All felt that this was the end. While they were still in Lithuanian territory, should jump from the train, hoping that at least one parent would survive so that I wouldn't be left alone. My father jumped from the moving train out of a little tiny window, and he fell unconscious. A railroad employee found him and proceeded to take him, said he was taking him to the Gestapo. But my father managed to free himself from him and run away. In August of 1944, the Russians occupied the territory where my father was hiding, and he became a free man. When my father came to look for me, I had not seen him for almost half a year. I remember my father asking me, did I recognize him? I didn't answer. I was still afraid. After my father jumped from the train went on to Dachau and Stutthof concentration camps. I'm sure that you've heard and read about the existence in concentration camps, about the suffering, the brutality, the deprivation, the horror. The fact that there are survivors of these camps is a miracle. Stutthof, my mother's camp, was liberated by the Russians in January of 1945. After I was reunited with my father, we still did not know actually if my mother had survived. We finally heard a year later that she was alive, and my father made plans for a reunion. Father had decided that we should not remain in Lithuania because it had become communist. So he wrote a letter to my mother telling her to remain where she was and that we would meet her. So father and I escaped from Lithuania, and we were reunited with my mother in Poland, in Lodz, the city of Lodz. I remember worrying would I recognize my mother, because I hadn't seen her for about a year and a half. But again, of course I did. We were now, my parents and I, finally together again. That we three survived and found each other was truly a miracle. I would like to conclude by saying that I'm particularly aware that those of us who survived the Shoah must keep telling our stories, that time is running out, and that it is important that the younger generation pass our stories on, that it is passed on from generation to generation, the door by door, so that what happened is never forgotten, that the world learns the lesson of the Holocaust, which I don't think the world is doing a good job